Okay. The first issue that I want to talk about briefly is the nature of the problem that you're trying to solve. As editors, we can certainly help you in the clearest presentation possible. We can look for typos. We can look for clarity, issues being presented, and in some cases, we may even find some design issues that might be. But unless you're working with a problem that's really fundable, then we're going to be of limited use to you. So. Are you solving a vexing problem, a practical or theoretical problem that's been around for a while? Are you breaking new ground? Are you influencing research in your field and adjacent fields? I would strongly urge you, particularly if you're early on in a grant proposal writing situation, to talk with someone knowledgeable about your research in your field, someone who knows your research and who has received funding. And just talk about this issue of are my ideas and how I'm approaching this fundable? I think this is very important for you to do this. Next slide. So the very important introduction. I think the introduction is really the most important part of a proposal. In NSF, it might be a summary page, in NIH, your specific aims page, and at NEH, other agencies, significance and contribution page. Okay, let's look at this in more detail. Next slide, please. That first paragraph, I think, is absolutely essential. It's here where you really need to grab your reviewer's attention. You've got to get their interest right away. Specify the problem that you're working on in the unique and effective way that you're going to go about solving that problem. I love the illustration here. Thank you, Emily, for the illustration. The hook. You need a hook, and it really should be in that first paragraph. Think about your panel members. They have a stack of things that they have to look at. I want them thinking about your proposal and not looking at that stack and thinking, "Oh, I got a lot of other things to do here, and I want to move through this quickly." It's not where I want your reviewer. So grab their interest right away. Believe it or not, in more than half the proposals I see, I couldn't tell you what the PI is actually doing from that first paragraph. The reader should know right away what you're about. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, I like this line, to our knowledge. There are no studies on the effects of thermal stress on meiosis and amphibia. There's something for everybody here. Thermal stress, there's global warming, meiosis, and important reproductive. Amphibia are in trouble worldwide. If this is in the right place, this needs to be right at the very beginning of the proposal. Believe it or not, sometimes I see great lines like this that are buried way back in the proposal, and it's kind of too late then. You've asked your reviewer to do too much. They're getting tired trying to figure out what you're trying to do. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, when you grab the reviewer's interest, I think they're going to have a positive feeling about the proposal right from the very beginning. They're going to be biased in your favor. We'll talk about bias later. It's something you want to avoid in your methodology, but here you want them biased in your favor, confirming and being willing to kind of confirm their positive feelings as they go through the proposal. This is called the confirmation bias. So realize that the power of this bias, and you want to benefit from it. You want that reader engaged immediately. Next slide, please. Okay. Again, it's worth asking about your audience. Who's going to be reading this? A good panel is going to be made up of a few people that are experts in your field, but also people that are in your general area, but not necessarily doing work in your area. They're kind of knowledgeable people, but they don't know the specific nuts and bolts of exactly what you're doing. So you want to avoid technical jargon. Every now and then I run across a proposal where I read the first few paragraphs and I have no idea, as an educated reader, I have no idea what this proposal is about. And the higher you go in a hierarchy, the decision-making hierarchy in a funding agency, the further away you get from expertise in your field. And this is particularly important now because we're seeing there's always been political influence, of course, in the funding of proposals. I mean, Congress has its role, and there's always been political, but we're seeing political influence on what's getting funded now. And I'm sure that individuals who are having some say in what's getting funded aren't doing research in your area. So make sure that what you're doing is, at least at the beginning of the proposal, is going to be clear to the educated layperson, actually. Just that clearly, state that clearly what you're doing so that readers who don't have an academic or science background in particular know what's going on. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, this is just a note on NSF career proposals. We're approaching the career proposal season now. Some of you may be thinking about this. A career proposal should look like a career proposal. Unfortunately, sometimes they don't. Uh, um, and I often see the usual in the summary page, the usual, these are the questions I'm asking or the hypothesis that I'm interested in and so on. Uh, but I would say probably between a third and a half of the career proposals I see do not mention education early on in the right in front of the summary page. And you want to do this because you want your reader to have a feeling right away that you are integrating your research and your education and educational aspects of your work. Not only in terms of what you're going to give to students and so on, but also what you're going to gain from this experience in terms of your development as an educator. And if you set that stage immediately, then the reader, the reviewer, is going to have a much easier time navigating and understanding that this is in fact a career proposal. This is not a standard research proposal that you're presenting. This is a particular kind of proposal. And unfortunately, many times I don't know that it's a career proposal until I'm well into the proposal. And then, oh, this is a career proposal? Oh, wait, now I've got to go back and rethink some of the. Don't want your reviewer doing that. I don't want your reviewer using that cognitive energy to go back and try, oh, I'm going to reframe this now. Okay. All right. So next slide, please. Now, the background section. This is where you explain in more detail what you're doing and why you are doing it. So sometimes I see something like our work is theory driven. Our methods are, and I go, well, wait a second now, hold it. What theory are you talking about? How are you advancing theory in your field? I find this is generally something that is a weak area in many proposals that I read, articulating what the theoretical background of the work is. What are the problems with the dominant existing theory in your field? And so what you want to do is contrast that dominant existing theory with what you're proposing. And how is this going to be a theoretical advance? And what are the implications of that? Unfortunately, I do see this on occasion. We're theory driven, and then I don't know what the theory is. So there we have it. So explain your contribution in relation to the theoretical background. Next slide, please. Okay, place to explain again. Our procedures offer an efficient alternative method of determining the likelihood of cell division under thermal stress conditions. Now, I'm likely to be very interested in this. Again, global warming, thermal conditions, here's a fundamental biological process, influences life as we know it. But wait, alternative to what? What are the limitations of the existing methods? How are your methods better? Again, contrast what you're proposing with the existing methods. And again, it's surprising to me how frequently I'm making this comment. You're suggesting something innovative in terms of methods, but you're really not really telling me what that innovation is and why this is better than the dominant methodology. So these are lost opportunities, and attending to this can really only strengthen your proposal and enhance the interest of your reviewers. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, again with NSF, for example, intellectual merit, this is really often inadequate. I would say at least half, maybe more, but at least half of the intellectual merit sections that I read don't really address intellectual merit. What they do is simply repeat what is being done. Probably already read that, with basically what's being done and the problem you're solving. I don't need a rehash of that. The other issue that I'm seeing, and I think I'm seeing this a little bit more frequently now, is an extremely lengthy section that's labeled as intellectual merit. Um, and the reviewer is going to have to then figure out what the merit is instead of just a pithy statement about this is how I'm contributing to the literature, this is a theoretical contribution, this is what's going on. Um, I'm seeing cases where you're forcing the reviewer to figure out what the merit is. Again, this is adding to the cognitive load of your reviewer or your panel, and you don't want to do that. You want to make this as easy as possible for them to navigate. So, what's in an intellectual merit section? We'll summarize what the contribution is to your literature. Summarize what theoretical contribution you're making. Well, I don't know if I have a theoretical, well, everyone has a theoretical framework. It's just a framework in which you're doing your research. It could be viewed very specifically or very broadly. Sometimes you may have to articulate your own theoretical framework. That's fine. But what is the contribution from a theoretical point of view? This is the intellectual merit section. Just repeating what you're doing does not reflect the intellectual merit or represent the intellectual merit of what you're doing. This is one of the weakest sections that I see in proposals right here. And reviewers will comment about this. Okay, next slide, please. Now, the NSF broader impact statement. And I should note, by the way, that this isn't just NSF. You should be talking about the intellectual merits and the broader impact for other agencies, not just as NSF. But anyway, they have a specific section, broader impact. Let's look at a couple of these now. In addition to the health-related consequences, our project will fund 3 graduate students and 1 postdoctoral fellow. I look at this and I think, what's the broader impact here? Almost everyone says this. Therefore, this says nothing. Okay, almost everyone says this. In addition to training 3 graduate students and postdoc, the results of our study may suggest treatments for a diversity of serious and life-threatening autoimmune disorders. And you can go on and elaborate a little bit. Now, that to me is a stronger, broader impact statement. Everyone talks about graduate students and postdocs. All right, that really doesn't strike to me at the heart of what a broader impact is. Certainly mention it. Okay, we're going to do some outreach in high schools, very important. But come back to the problem that you are trying to solve and the broader impact of solving that problem. Make sure that that's presented. Too often I see something that's just limited to the first option here. Next slide, please. Okay, consider. Okay, I have no real problem with asking research questions, but I think there are some advantages to rephrase when you can, and you often can, rephrase a research question to a hypothesis. In this proposal, we think that teachers enrolled in our STEAM program will engage more effectively with their students, and this will be reflected in enhanced student performance. This could be stated differently. We hypothesize that teachers enrolled in our program will engage more effectively with their students. This will be reflected in enhanced student performance. Next slide, please. Why do I suggest this? Well, to me, this is simply more rigorous academically. What does that mean? Well, if you have a specific hypothesis, it requires you to go out on a limb. You're making a specific prediction, and that requires a deeper analysis and presentation of the problem. And I think that will generally be well received by your academic reviewer and panel committee or community. In some cases, I think this might actually offer you a competitive edge. I have a series of proposals here. It's generally in the field where research questions are the mode. Every now and then there's a hypothesis. But if you come along with a series, you have questions and that leads to these specific hypotheses, that might just get the attention of 1 or 2 of the reviewers, and they could really influence decision making that goes on in terms of whether you're going to be funded or not. Possible competitive advantage. To me, I think it's just more academically rigorous. And in the competitive world of academics, I think that's worth contemplating. Sometimes it's difficult to convert, but in most cases, I can suggest the wording of a hypothesis, a testable hypothesis. So consider that. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, hypotheses are specific in prediction. What do we have here? We hypothesize that racial diversity in the elementary school classroom will correlate with social skills and academic performance. I was just editing a paper last night, and filled with statements like this. Will correlate with. What does that mean? Every correlation has to be labeled as positive or negative. We default to positive correlations, but not all correlations are positive. Some of them are negative. So this should be stated differently. We hypothesize that racial diversity in the elementary school classroom will positively correlate with social skills and academic performance. I'm just noticing now in this example, the words racial diversity. We're gonna talk about those very words in a few minutes. But the idea here is be specific with the prediction in your hypothesis. Otherwise, it's not a hypothesis if there's no prediction there. This is another research question. Next slide, please. Hypotheses avoid unintended consequences. I love to see these, okay? Because then I realize that I'm really doing my job as an editor when I'm discovering this. We hypothesize that blocking uptake of our target neurotransmitters will positively affect cognitive functioning and thus result in greater spatio-temporal coordination. Now, on the surface, this appears to be an innocent and interesting sort of hypothesis. Let's take a closer look. Next slide. Unintended consequences. We hypothesize the blocking functioning, and thus, it's that word thus. Because what they're really doing is we hypothesize that blocking uptake of our target neurotransmitters will positively affect cognitive functioning and result in greater spatial temporal coordination. When you use the term thus, you're making a statement about cause and effect. That's what they're doing here. And so if I read this, I'm thinking, oh, okay, we're going to be looking at a cause and effect relationship when I see that, if it's stated like in the first version here. But we could have the blocking of this, the uptake of these neurotransmitters, and that could result. But that's not saying necessarily that there's a causative relationship there. It's just that this does occur. So this is a more nuanced, weaker statement. Okay, the second statement is more nuanced and weaker. The first is pretty specific in terms of a cause and effect relationship, and that's not what the PI was doing. They were doing what was stated in the second one. You start talking cause and effect, and I'm really interested in that, but then the bar changes then when you're talking causative relationships. Okay, next slide, please. Maintain content and structural consistency. I see this a lot, where we may have a research question or hypothesis, which is in a background section, and then later on in an approach or a method section, all of a sudden the research question and hypothesis has morphed into something different. What does that force me to do? Well, it does a couple of things, but as a reviewer or a panel member, it forces me to go back and say, well, wait a second. Am I misunderstanding what's going on? I've got to go back then to the original statement in terms of the question or the hypothesis. And then I have to come back to the other statement and try to reconcile them. Again, this is cognitive load on your reviewer, and you don't want to do that. These people have other things to do than try to figure out what you're actually doing. So maintain consistency. Why am I mentioning this? Because I see this all too frequently when there is just an inconsistency. Okay. In NIH proposals, for example, in other words, I see this in NIH. I see a lot of NIH proposals, and I see this. Cite the specific aims by number when you're describing your hypotheses, or if you're in an approach or a method section. Coordinate them so that I know that this hypothesis, a research question or hypothesis that you're working on over here relates back to this particular aim. And that will really help your reviewer and your panel member be able to navigate through the proposal. If there is this consistency and this tying together of important aims. This is aim one, aim 1A, aim 1B. Well, then use that terminology, use those labels later on so that they really understand how you're doing what you say you're going to be doing. I see this problem in probably at least 2/3 of the NH proposals that I see. I see this elsewhere, but I'm focusing on NH because I see this a lot there. And I do a lot of NIH proposals. Okay. In other words, help the reviewer navigate through the proposal. Help the reviewer navigate. So here, one tip, I think, for the writer is to try to take yourself outside of the perspective of the writer and put yourself in the perspective of the reviewer. Is this going to be easy for just really ask yourself that. Is this going to be easy for the reviewer or the panel member to navigate, to understand this? Try to step outside of your role as the writer, the PI writer, and step into the role of the reader. And if you do this, maybe you'll discover, oh, wait a second, maybe that isn't quite so easy to understand. Okay. Next slide, please. How are we doing on time? All right. Preliminary data they're not only important, they're really essential. If you don't have preliminary data, well, then this is the clearest way to demonstrate to your reviewers or your panel members that you got the experience and that you can actually, there's a likelihood you can actually pull this off, that you can do this work. A problem that I see rather routinely here, actually, is that as an editor, or I'm trying to put myself in the position of the reviewer when I'm actually editing, I'm trying to do that. I have to pull those preliminary data together and package them somehow. And more often than not, I see the preliminary data spread out rather than pulled together. The other problem that I see here is that oftentimes the preliminary work is not clearly labeled as yours or someone else's, and whether it's published or not published. Make sure you're doing this. Make sure that if this is your preliminary work, then it's labeled as such. And if it's unpublished, make sure that's labeled. If it's published, make sure there's a citation. That's another issue. Sometimes there are lots of places where there should be citations and there aren't. But here, this is very important to do this. The reviewer really has to understand what your experience, your specific experience is, so they can get a feel for whether you can actually do this work. This is a real example. Anecdotally, we found that increasing the temperature of, well, wait a second, anecdotally, we don't want to use that word at all, okay? That just denotes a lack of rigor, storytelling, I don't know what. But it doesn't reflect serious, systematic approach to a problem. So don't use terminology like that. But the preliminary data, very important. What I like to see actually is a section that says preliminary studies or preliminary results or preliminary data, something like that, which is very clear. But at a minimum somewhere, at least try to pull them together so there's a consistent presentation as to what your experience is and why you can pull this off. Next slide, please. With the preliminaries, oh yeah, okay. Be critical, okay. Be critical of in this context of your preliminary results using the 1 to 5 Likert scale. There was a statistically significant. There's p is less than 0.01 between the control group, the mean of 3.59, and the experimental group, 3.41. I think one always has to ask, how significant is a statistically significant effect? No one's going to be fooled here. There's no real difference between 3.59 and 3.41. I don't care if you got 1,000 subjects. There's no real difference here on a Likert, because there are issues with Likerts and response and reliability and all those issues. So the bottom line is present your preliminary results in really a straightforward and honest manner. If there is a weak effect, then you can turn that to your advantage. You could talk about how in your methodology you think that you can strengthen that effect. Okay, so you can take a week appearing data and you can turn that to your advantage, but present realistically. Okay, all right, next slide, please. Methods. Avoid statements suggest any kind of bias. Okay, as I mentioned before, you want the confirmation bias on the part of your reviewer or your panel member, but you want to avoid bias in your own work. These are real quotes, basically. We use a floating data collection methodology, which allows us to modify in relation to the results we are receiving. Oh my goodness. You know, I don't know if I'm going to believe anything that comes out of your lab if there's something like this. Our methods are designed to avoid bias by letting the research drive the inquiry. Wait a second, I always thought that the inquiry and the problem and the hypotheses and that drove the research. And so every now and then I'll run across something like this where the red flags immediately come up in terms of bias. And you want to avoid this, okay? If I saw this as I have reviewed, particularly for NSF, when I was a professor, I reviewed many proposals. I saw something like this, man, that proposal is going to be dead in the water. Okay. I don't know if I can trust anything that comes up. So be mindful of bias, and you want to avoid any hint of bias at all. That will be picked up on and not viewed positively. Okay. Next slide, please. Methods should be accurately described. Yeah, I like this. We plan to design a 2-by-2 study. Group A will receive testosterone, Group B, estrogen, Group C, estradiol, and Group D, an oil control. Hey, that sounds fine, okay? With one issue, right? This is not a 2-by-2 design. I've seen this. Not a 2-by-2 design. Next slide, please. This is a 2-by-2 design. What is a 2-by-2 design? What does 2-by-2 mean? You've got two. Can you see my cursor as I'm moving it or not? No, anyway, you've got two main variables here. Okay. Whoops. You've got two main variables here. You've got adult gender and you've got testosterone, two variables. And then within each of those variables, you have two other variables, the gender variable, male and female, sex variable, male and female, and levels of testosterone. So you've got four separate groups. This is a 2-by-2 design. So make sure that when you're labeling your design, that you label it properly. Because if I see something like this, which obviously I have, or I wouldn't be talking about this, I wonder about your expertise as a researcher, and can you really do this work? And you don't want your reviewer or panel member thinking about your work in that regard, in that way. Next slide, please. Watch for careless and seemingly innocent wording, okay? Our pilot study will provide the most detailed examination to date of microRNA structure and meiosis in an invertebrate species. Now, I could be kind of interested in this. MicroRNA structures, popular topic. Meiosis, basic process, inverted species. Many are having difficulty. The problem is the word pilot. Here, I'm reading an R01 or I'm reading a standard NSF proposal, and all of a sudden there's this word pilot, and then I go, well, wait a second. Pilot to what? Is this a pilot study? What's it a pilot for? I thought I was reading a R01 here. Well, this is now you're telling me it's pilot. When I saw this, and I've seen this, it disorients me. I'm wondering what's going on here. You don't want to you don't want to disorient your reviewer or your panel member, right? So be very careful of the careless and seemingly uncertain stuff. This is the kind of stuff that we can pick up on. Okay, we can pick up on this, but you should be mindful of this when you're writing. Okay, this happens. Careless wording. Go back to that hypothesis with that word thus. That's careless wording, but it changes the meaning of the hypothesis and the expectations of the reviewer or the panel member. So careless wording, watch for that. Read very carefully. Next slide, please. Read your work very carefully. Landscape of federal funding is changing. Watch out for DEI related terminology. I'm still very conservative in this regard. Um, Court cases and so on aside, I think we're still in an era where we need to be concerned about this. Let's look at a couple of possibilities here. We will choose subjects that reflect variation in sex, race, and socioeconomic status. How common has this been? I mean, this is standard. This is just standard demographic stuff. Okay. Um, for us doing the research for academics, there's no issue here. In fact, you want to do this. You might be interested in sex, race, socioeconomic status. These are all extremely important variables. But we're in a particular period of time now where this kind of language could get you flagged, and you don't want that. So this could be reworded. We will choose subjects that vary in demographic characteristics. That's it. Leave it at that. Uh, the knowledgeable individual knows what this means. Some individuals looking at this may not know what that means, and that's probably good. Okay, just leave it at that. All right, it's not being dishonest. Okay? We know what this means. Um, so in most cases, we can take care of DEI related. We as editors can take care of this language. There are situations in which, however, the nature of the questions are so deeply embedded in these issues of sex, race, and socioeconomic status that we have difficulty. Okay, and sometimes I will point out, I don't know about this particular aspect of your work. Maybe you might just want to leave this out because there's still enough that I don't think it really damages the proposal. Sometimes, the proposal is just so centered on these issues that, maybe you want to go to an NGO, maybe you want to go to a private foundation and not go to the federal. Think about this very carefully as talk with your RA, talk with colleagues that are knowledgeable in this field. And, we can talk about this. Maybe you want to go to another agency. Anyway, this is one of the things that we're concerned about as editors, making sure that you're not needlessly flagged. And once that happens, again, no, we want to avoid that. Next slide, please. Mediators and moderators. Okay, almost inevitably, when I see the words mediator or moderator, there's a problem. Okay, almost, I would say 9 out of 10. 9 out of 10 times I see the terms mediator and moderator, there's an issue. In an experiment, the path from the independent variable, the thing you're manipulating, and the dependent variable, that thing that you're interested in, that's going to be affected, cause and effect, if you want to look at it that way, that relationship could be very complicated. Okay, it can be driven by mediating and moderating variables, the influence of those. But we see confusion. Simple confusion might be a mediator is called a moderator, and a moderator is called a mediator. If I see that in a proposal, then I'm going to wonder about your expertise as a researcher, and can you really do this work? And you don't want your reviewer or panel member to be wondering that. That's not what you want them to be wondering when they're thinking about your work. Next slide, please. So just very briefly, okay, what's a mediating variable? Now, mediator is over here. There's a theoretically driven causal link between the independent and dependent variables. Okay. And I see this often in NIH proposals where you're talking about some kind of program, some kind of intervention, might be your independent variable, and then parenting skills, for example, might be a dependent variable. Right? So a mediator is that causal link. Why does the independent variable influence the dependent variable? Well, because of maybe motivation to be a better parent, or in terms of income and longevity. Income is independent variable. Your dependent variable is longevity. What is the mediator? Well, maybe it's healthcare mediates this relationship between the two. That's what mediators are. Next slide, please. Moderators. What's a moderating variable? Okay. Well, it's very simply those demographics that we were talking about earlier: age, sex, race, socioeconomic status. So those demographic factors can influence the extent to which the mediator mediates, has its effect. All right. In other words, it's the nuancer. All right. It can influence that the mediator has, that linkage. Um, this gets complicated in part because the mediator can act at different levels of this, more on the independent variable side or more on the dependent variable side. And I often see allusions to that without a clear presentation of what that mediator is going to be doing. What the moderator is going to be doing. If you're talking mediator, make sure that you are justifying that element as being the mediator. I would say 9 times out of 10, there's no justification for the mediator being the mediator. And I have come back many times and said, well, wait a second, this moderator over here might actually be the mediator. Why do you think the mediator is the mediator? Right? So this is a lot more complicated than what many people who attempt this think that it actually is. Next slide, please. So to me, the bottom line here on mediators and moderators is work with a knowledgeable statistician. I say, actually, I'm adding knowledgeable here now because statisticians are not all created equally. Some more knowledgeable in this area. If you're going to talk mediators and moderators, then work with a statistician who is experienced in this area. Because most of the time, I'm not a statistician, right? And I can pick out problems in most presentations that I see. And that's not good. That doesn't, and I'll tell you that there are many panel members and reviewers who like to think of themselves as statistical experts. And so somebody's going to pick up on this for sure. Okay, whether they really know much about it or not, they're going to pick up on it. So this is the kind of thing that we can flag. But when you're thinking about this, by the time it gets to us, it's almost too late. You should have been working with a statistician in this presentation. That's my best advice there for you on that. Next slide, please. Final thoughts on methods. In general, what's a method section supposed to do? Give enough information so that your reviewer or your panel member can begin to think about replicating the work. All right, that's your bottom line for what your description of how you're going to do. Now, the more technical your work is, the more your reviewers are going to examine those methods. I think I mentioned before, when I started doing this, I was more or less assuming that there wouldn't be that much concern with methods, but oh, I was really very wrong about that. Reviewers can be very concerned about the methods, particularly if you're working in highly technical areas. Make sure that you are addressing potential problems that might occur. Now, NSF asks you to do this. I think you should be doing this for any agency. Make sure that you are talking about potential problems that might exist, because the more technically complex the work that you're proposing, I'll guarantee that there's going to be somebody on that panel who knows something about those methods and is going to ask you about how those methods are being applied in your particular context. So be prepared, okay? Be prepared, right, to really be able to justify those methods in your particular experimental context. I've just seen a lot of panel comments about this, and so anyway, that's a few final thoughts on your methods. Next slide, please. I think it is excellent advice. If you're a novitiate here, you're thinking about your first, maybe even your second proposal, to check out some example proposals. Kim Purcell sent this information on to me. You can go to these sites, and there should be examples there of proposals that have been funded. There are 3 agencies here. You'll get the general idea, okay? You can also just get on and Google, and many universities maintain sites in which they place proposals that have been funded, PIs from their faculty that have been funded. So I would strongly advise you to do this. Look at successful proposals, see how they're structured, how they're worded, the nature of their content, what's the hook, that kind of thing. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, today's presentation was just part of a longer series that we have. You can see now, this is number 9. Look at number 10. Dan Freud, the editor over in engineering, on the 18th, is going to be presenting the second presentation on editing, grammar, wording, the more technical and structured aspects of editing, things that he sees in proposals. So I think you might be very interested in attending that workshop. There are other topics here coming up. This is in case you haven't looked at this list before. Graphics, budgeting, supplementary documents, crafting evaluation plans, and so on. So you can see that research development offers a very rich series of workshops. And I believe that these are available. You can go and look at these after the fact. So I think if you're coming new to this, you might want to just look over this list because there's a lot of good advice that has been recorded here for you. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, what research development versus editing does. What we do as editors, there are three of us, three editors. We look for the usual typos in grammar and spelling and sentence structure and paragraph construction. We look for all that. We can help clean all that up, okay? We also look for the clarity and logic, and these are the kinds of things that I was talking about today. In other words, we try, can't always do this because we're not experts in all fields, obviously, but we try to flag basic issues that might concern a reviewer. And we can catch some of these, as I pointed out here today. These are the things that we can discover and we can hopefully rectify. So we try to be we try to flag these issues. I try to put myself to the best of my ability to put myself in the position of a reviewer looking at this proposal, and that's the way I'm trying to approach this. So we try to flag issues. This is what research editing does. Next slide, please. What are our policies? Okay, we serve ASU faculty, research staff, and postdocs in any discipline. And we'll do the occasional administrator also, okay? We edit grant proposals, large and small. We have no dollar figure. So you people in the arts and humanities, you don't need a $2 million piece of equipment, okay? Your proposals run to 10, 25, 10, 15, 20, 25,000. Rarely do they seem to get larger than that. They can, but they don't very often. You're in the arts and humanities. Can you absolutely approach us? I love to see arts and humanities proposals because I don't see very many of them. Most of them are NIH, NSF, some of the other federal agencies, an increasing number of NGOs. But I love to see them. So if you've got a $10,000 proposal, don't think that it's not worth it's worth our attention. I want to see that proposal. Okay, I'd like to see those. So large or small, we have no dollar figure for editing. We have no dollar figure for editing. We will do this if the ASU member is a PI or a co-PI. Okay. We also do book proposals, journal manuscripts, book chapters for ASU first authors. We can't do them if you're a third author, and we do understand that oftentimes, the anchor author is a senior person, and but we don't have. There are only three of us. We don't have the resources, so you have to be a first author. Okay, but we do book proposals, manuscripts, and again, that's important, manuscripts, because unless you've got 5 or 6 publications under your belt, it's going to be tough getting funding. So manuscripts are important. So we edit those. First submitted, first served, no reservations. Often I'm asked, well, what does next week look like for you? Well, right now, this is the way it looks, but it could change overnight. And sometimes it does. Sometimes we get several things in a day. We don't take reservations. We just do things as they come in. We will look at, oh, wait a second now. This is an emergency situation. They need this pretty quickly. This other paper over here, they have a deadline that's way out there. They're really early. Okay, maybe we can move around here to accommodate an emergency situation because life is complex and you're running late on something. We understand that. To our extent, we can be flexible and we can deal with that as long as we meet our deadlines, which we tend to do. Which is the time you tell us you want this thing back from us. We edit Word files. If you send us a PDF file, we will convert to Word. We'll edit Word and send the Word back to you, and you can reconvert. The conversions, again, a Word file never looks like what was in the PDF file. So that's up to you to get that back into a PDF if you wish. So we edit in Word files. Graphics. Editing, research editing does not do graphics, and we don't edit graphics, and we don't even move graphics around. We might note, okay, this graphic really might go over there, but we don't move it. Okay. The few times I've tried to do that, I realize it just changes the whole grant. Usually a grant proposal is in a template, and if I move something around, then everything, no, I don't do that. We don't do that. So we don't create or edit graphic. We will comment on them. Certainly, we'll do that. We prefer 3 days for most grant proposals, a couple of weeks, 10, 12 days, depending on manuscripts and book chapters. Book proposals take longer. Book proposals take a little bit longer. If you got an emergency book proposal, maybe we can look at it quickly, but they can take longer. Submit through our portal. There's an email address there for you. If you have questions, okay, if you've got questions, here's my email address. And Elizabeth is editor associate, one of the three editors. That's her email address. Next slide, please. Yeah, okay. Next slide, please. Do we have another slide? You can go to this site to tap into a portal for research development. And this is a portal to rich resources that research development has for you in terms of your proposal writing. Next slide is simply questions. Are there any questions about this material? We've got like a few minutes left. Any questions that anyone has that they would like to pose?
Hi, I have a quick question, if it's possible, and have time for one quick question.
Sure.
Thanks so much for the advice and all of the editing and suggestions that you have made. I have one question about the preliminary data. So between the unpublished preliminary data and the peer review published from my previous work,
Mhm.
what could you advise me to use in the application?
Well, the published work could go in a background section leading to the logic of what you're doing. It could go there. Depending upon your narrative and the flow, it could go in a preliminary section. Oftentimes, the preliminary data are unpublished data. Usually, they're unpublished data. But I have seen published data presented there, labeled as such, that is relevant to the logic of what you're doing and how it's related to the preliminary data. So this depends upon really where you want to put things and the kind of narrative you want to present and the structure of the story that you're presenting. I could see the published work going earlier in a background section or in the preliminary data section, but principally the preliminary data are usually unpublished data. Okay, specific to that particular focus of research that you're in now. Other research that maybe you covered in the background, that sort of background and so on, but now you're really honing in on a particular problem with particular methodology. And we've used these methods. The more technologically advanced, the more important this is. We've used these methods. We have these results. Unpublished data in that I would desire a clearly labeled preliminary data section. So does that begin to
Yeah,
address
yeah, that
your
helps.
question?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
was debating how much unpublished preliminary data I should put in, because it's the
Yeah.
point. If I put in too much, then they're gonna
Yeah.
say, "Oh, you already did everything. What's the point of us
Yeah.
funding your work?"
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
So
Yeah, this is an interesting question because particularly with federal agencies, you have a very structured template that you have to fit stuff into, and so you have to decide what weight you're going to. I would tend to weight more heavily the preliminary data section. So if it's an issue of how much should I put in here, I would err toward putting that in that. I would wait toward that section. Yeah, I would do that. I think the preliminary data, in my opinion, other people may have other opinions, but in my opinion, the preliminary data are so important. I can't envision a situation where I have ever thought, gee, I've never, now thinking about my experience as an editor, I've never asked myself, why is there so much preliminary data here? There's too much preliminary
Oh,
data. It's never occurred to me.
oh,
I don't
okay.
think I've ever seen a situation where there's too much preliminary data.
Yeah, because I
Maybe
was
somebody else has. I haven't. Um,
yeah, I wasn't sure the balance, the fine balance be between how much I should put in versus the amount of work I propose for the next 5 years. If I put in too much preliminary data and reviewer gonna say, okay, you already done like 3 or 5 years of work there in your preliminary work, they may say the money is not worth investing. So I try to hold a little bit of from showing everything. But then
yeah,
at the same time, like you said, preliminary data is so important that we need to put a lot of effort into highlight that first, the method
yeah,
is doable, workable, and second, I will be able to perform or deliver what I promised to deliver. So that's why
yeah,
having your input is really good. So when
yeah,
considering how much you should put in.
yeah. This is to me, this issue is dealt with on a case by case basis.
Okay.
I have to see what your problem is. I
Yeah.
have to see the depth of the background which is necessary. I have to see
Okay.
the depth of the presentation of the methodology. I have to look at your package to get a feel for, gee, you've underemphasized this area and you've overemphasized this area. My feeling is that a reviewer is going to have some issues over here and there may be too much over here. I have to, this is a question of the gestalt, the whole picture. And at this point, I just can't. There's no standard answer for 20% should be in this section and 10%. This emerges to me as an issue on a case by case basis, and I just have to get a feel for the proposal in its entirety to be able to answer that. So if you were to submit something to us, you can, on our submission page, there's always a little box where you can put a comment. Like, what are you looking for? What do you want? Or you could say, well, I'm particularly concerned about this issue. Could you focus on this? And we'd be happy to do that.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I
So
do that.
that's all I can say is that I'm sorry, but I'd have to see your
No, it's
proposal to
really
be able
helpful.
to to be able to really advise on balance. And it's a
It's really
feeling I have
helpful.
after I look at it.
Yeah. Thanks,
So,
Terry.
yeah.
Hey, Terry, could I have a follow-up question? We like the career award, a
Oh,
very quick one.
huh.
Yeah. So you mentioned like we shouldn't. It seems like you mentioned the education part in the career award should be appear in the front part of it. I mean the
Yeah.
first part of it. So where
Oh, yeah.
should we mention education of the proposal? So the
Well,
final part, yeah.
you know, yeah, yes, I think so. In that, if it's NSF, a good career, yeah, in that summary page, okay, where you've got a brief statement about intellectual merit, and before that, you usually present briefly what your problem is and how you're going to go about solving it, why it's important. In there also, just have a little paragraph on, and these are my educational goals. So I know that it's kind of tough putting all this information into one page for that NSF summary, but I think you should do that. And then later on in the proposal, after you do the research, then you can have a section that specifically deals with your education. But you've already planted the idea that there's going to be an integration of the research and the educational aspects. You've planted that idea in the mind of the reviewer, and they're going to be thinking about that as they go through. And then you've got your section that more specifically talks about education after the research component. And 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 I'm glad you asked this because I think you should view this as a two-way street. In fact, NSF actually has this wording that it isn't just that the research influences the education, but the educational aspects can also possibly influence the research. And what I see almost always is, yeah, the research is going to influence how I teach this class, and I'm going to offer a new section and this kind of stuff. but think about the opposite direction, that the education might influence the nature of the research. For example, you're going to be teaching or offering now an advanced graduate seminar in this research area, and you expect that the problems that you work on there will feed into the research that's just one example of where you can have the educational aspects influencing the research. But I'd make this in general a brief statement about what your goals are and how funding can influence it very briefly in that summary page. I know this is difficult because space is limited, but then you've got much more space after you do the research aspect to talk about education. But I would talk about education in that regard. And your proposal is likely to stand out because I rarely see a consideration of how the education might turn around and influence the research. The research is critically important. This is a special proposal. So we want to weave together as much as we can the education with the research. Does that?
Yeah, I think it's very clear. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Yeah, thank
Yeah.
you.
Okay. I think we have one more minute. Any other questions? No? But you can always contact me. You got the information here. You can contact me or you can contact Elizabeth. And thank you for attending.
Thank you.
Good. Thank you.
Mhm.